There are some doors in this world that stay closed for a reason, and there are some that stay closed because nobody alive remembers why. The cabin I want to tell you about sat on 17 acres of scrub pine and red clay at the end of a county road nobody maintained anymore. The deadbolt on the front door had been turned in the autumn of 1971, and from that day until the morning I came back to it with a crowbar and a folded piece of paper in my jacket pocket. No human being had crossed its threshold. 53 years of dust. 53 years of wasps building the eaves, and mice nesting in the floorboards, and rain rotting the porch one slow inch at a time. 53 years of a secret that my grandfather had taken to his grave, because he believed, and he was right, that nobody in our family was ready to hear it yet. I was 17 years, old and night. My stepmother packed my things into a plastic garbage bag and set them on the porch. My father watched from the kitchen window and did not come out. That was the day I stopped being a son in that house. I didn't know yet that I was about to become something else entirely. I didn't know yet that the cabin existed. I didn't know yet what was under its floor, or whose name was written in the ledger buried beneath it, or why my grandfather had spent the last 6 years of his life making certain that door would open for me and nobody else. This is the story of how the land I was told I didn't belong to turned out to belong to me all along, and how a locked cabin in the woods held a truth that rearranged 3 generations of my family in a single afternoon. Before I go any further, subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. This story is long, and it doesn't get easier before it gets better, but I promise you it goes somewhere worth going. My name is Caleb Hollis. I was born in a farmhouse in the eastern part of our county, the kind of county where everybody is related to everybody somehow, and the courthouse still has the original oak benches from 1889. My mother died when I was 4. I don't remember her voice, but I remember the way she used to hum while she shelled peas on the back steps, and I remember that her hands smelled like lemon balm because she grew it wild along the fence line. Those are the only 2 things I have of her, and I have kept them both. My father remarried when I was 9. Her name was Deanna, and she came with 2 sons of her own, Garrett, who was my age exactly, and Travis, who was 2 years older and had already figured out that cruelty was a kind of currency in a house like ours. My father was not a bad man. He was a tired man. He had been tired since my mother died, and Deanna was a woman who knew how to fill a tired man's silence with her own voice until he forgot he had ever had one. By the time I was 12, my father agreed with whatever she said. By the time I was 15, he had stopped looking at me directly when he spoke. By the time I was 17, I was sleeping in the unfinished room above the tool shed because Deanna said the upstairs bedroom was needed for Travis's weight equipment. The farm was 320 acres. Row crops mostly, corn, soybeans, a little winter wheat on the South 60. My grandfather had bought the original 160 acres in 1958 with money he had saved from 30 years of welding pipe on oil rigs in the Gulf, and he had added parcels throughout the 60s whenever a neighbor needed cash and was willing to sell cheap. By the time he died in 1977, for years before I was born, he had built the place into the biggest continuous farm in the township, and he had done it without ever borrowing $1 from a bank. My father inherited all of it. My father was his only child. I want to tell you about my grandfather, even though I never met him, because the people who didn't know him all told me the same thing, and the thing they told me was important. My grandfather was a quiet man. He did not drink. He did not hunt. He did not go to church more than twice a year, and he did not tolerate liars. He worked from dark to dark. He paid his taxes in cash at the courthouse window because he did not trust the mail, and he kept every receipt he ever received in a series of shoe boxes in the attic of the main house. He had one close friend in the world, a man named Elias Burke, who lived on the adjoining property to the north. And when Elias died in 1970, my grandfather did not speak for almost a month. That is what my great-aunt Mirabelle told me before she passed. She said, "Your granddaddy loved Elias Burke the way some men love a brother, and when Elias went, something in your granddaddy went with him." 1 year after Elias Burke died, my grandfather walked out to the far northwest corner of the farm, the corner that bordered the old Burke place, and he closed the door of a small cabin that sat there. He turned the deadbolt. He walked away. And according to everyone who was living at the time, he never went back. That cabin was not supposed to exist on our land. That is the first thing you need to understand. The Burt property had been sold off in pieces after Elias died, because Elias had no children and his widow needed the money. The parcels went to 3 different buyers. But the small wedge that contained the cabin, 1 3/4 acres of pine scrub with a half-collapsed well and a spring that ran even in August, that wedge had somehow ended up on our deed. My father never mentioned it. Deanna never mentioned it. As far as I knew, growing up, our farm ended at the fence line where the soybean field met the tree line. I used to stand at that fence sometimes on summer evenings and watch the fireflies come up out of the woods, and I never once thought there was anything on the other side of the trees, except more trees. I want to tell you what my life was like on that farm before everything broke open, because if you don't understand what I absorbed in silence, you won't understand why I held my tongue later when I had every reason to speak. I did the work. From the time I was 10 years old, I did the work. I fed the cattle we kept for our own beef. I ran the hay rake in June. I walked beans in July. I rode the combine with my father in the fall until my father decided he preferred to ride it with Travis, and then I ran the grain cart alongside him instead. I mucked the stalls. I rebuilt the fence along the south line when a storm took out 40 yards of it in 2019. I was 14, and I did it alone across 3 weekends. Because Deanna said Garrett had a baseball tournament and Travis had a job in town, which was not true in either case. I kept the books of the small hay operation my grandfather had started in 1962, because my father had lost interest in it, and Deanna said the numbers hurt her eyes. I knew every acre of that farm the way you know the face of somebody you love. I knew which corner of the East 40 pooled water after a heavy rain, and which fence post the cattle liked to rub against, and which section of the north line the deer came through in October. I knew where my grandfather had planted the old walnut tree the year my father was born, and I knew which rock in the pasture my mother had sat on the morning she went into labor with me. And none of it, according to Deanna, belonged to me, because according to Deanna, I was not really family. She did not say it that way at first. At first, she said it in smaller ways. She set the table for 4 and made me eat standing at the counter. She bought school supplies for Garrett and Travis and told me to ask my father for mine, knowing my father would be in the barn. She put my laundry in a separate basket and left it on the back porch. She stopped using my name by the time I was 14. She called me he when I was in the room, and that boy when she thought I wasn't. My father heard it, and my father said nothing. That was the part that broke me slowly. Not what she did, what he allowed. The day she put my things in the garbage bag was a Thursday in late August. I had just turned 17 the week before. I had come home from school, and Travis was in the kitchen with 2 of his friends, and one of them, a kid named Colby whose father ran the feed store, had my grandfather's pocket watch on the table in front of him. My grandfather's pocket watch. The one with the engraved back that said H. Hollis, 1952, from your brother. The one my father had promised me when I was 10 years old. The one that had been sitting in a velvet box on the mantel in the front room for as long as I had been alive. Colby was trying to open the back of it with a pocket knife. I did not yell. I want you to understand that. I did not yell, and I did not swing. I walked over the table, and I put my hand over the watch, and I said that belongs to my grandfather, and I picked it up, and I put it in my pocket, and I turned to leave the kitchen. Travis stood up and hit me in the side of the head with a ceramic mug. The mug broke. I went down on one knee. There was blood in my ear, and my vision went white around the edges, and by the time I could see straight again, Deanna was standing in the doorway, and she was not looking at Travis. She was looking at me, and she said, "Get out of my kitchen and get out of my house, and do not come back until you can act like a civilized person." I asked where my father was. She said, "Your father agrees with me." 2 hours later, my things were on the porch in a black plastic bag. The pocket watch was still in my pocket. Deanna tried to take it from me on the way out. I did not let her. That was the only thing I did not let her take. I walked 3 miles down the county road that night with my bag over my shoulder, and I slept in the loft of an old tobacco barn that belonged to a family named Keter. I knew the Keters because old man Keter had bought hay from my grandfather for 20 years and from my father for 15 more, and I knew the combination on the barn side door because I had been the one who delivered the hay every June. I stayed in that loft for 4 nights. I drank from the spigot on the side of the house. When the lights were off, I ate 2 sleeves of saltines I had grabbed from the pantry on my way out. On the 5th morning, old man Keter, his name was Harlan Keter, and he was 78 years old, and he walked with a cane made from a piece of dogwood, climbed up the ladder to the loft with a thermos of coffee and 2 biscuits wrapped in a paper towel. He sat down on a hay bale across from me. He did not ask me what I was doing there. He poured me a cup of coffee in the thermos lid and handed it to me. He said, "Son, your granddaddy was a friend of mine. I owe him a lot of years of kindness I never got to pay back. You stay here as long as you need to stay, and when you're ready to talk, I'll listen." That was the day my life started over. I just didn't know it yet. I stayed with the Keters for 3.5 years. I slept in their spare room. I helped Harlan with his cattle. I finished high school by driving to the county seat 3 days a week, and I worked at the grain elevator on the weekends to put money in an account Harlan helped me open at the little bank on Main Street. I was 19 years old the first time I saw my father again, and it was from across the parking lot of the Tractor Supply, and he saw me too, and he turned around and walked back to his truck and drove away. I was 20 years old when I heard through Harlan that Deanna had convinced my father to start the paperwork to leave the farm entirely to Garrett and Travis. I was 20 years old in 3 months when I heard to the county clerk, because Harlan had a cousin who worked at the courthouse, that the paperwork had been filed. I did not contest it. I did not call my father. I did not send a letter. I worked at the grain elevator. I saved my money and I waited. I want to tell you about the lawyer now, because the lawyer is where the story turns. His name was Mr. Ambrose Whitfield. He was 81 years old when I met him. He had been my grandfather's attorney since 1961, and he was still practicing 3 days a week out of a narrow brick office on the square in the county seat. And he had a daughter named Ruth who ran the office, and a grandson named Peter who was learning the business. Mr. Whitfield had handled my grandfather's will when my grandfather died in 1977. He had handled the transfer of the farm to my father in 1978. He had handled the small estate of my great-aunt Mirabelle when she passed in 2016. And he had, apparently, handled something else that I did not know about until the week of my 21st birthday. On the Monday after my 21st birthday, Ruth Whitfield called the Keter house and asked for me by name. She said her father would like to see me at his office on Thursday at 10 in the morning. She said it was a matter her father had been instructed to discuss with me in person on or after my 21st birthday by a client who was now deceased. I asked her which client. She said, "Mr. Harlan Hollis, your grandfather. If this story is moving you, hit the like button and turn on the bell so you never miss another story like this one. Because what I am about to tell you is the part that took me 53 years of family silence to understand, and I am not going to hurry it. I drove to the county seat on Thursday morning in a borrowed pickup with a sun-bleached dashboard and one working windshield wiper. I wore the only button-down shirt I owned. I walked up the 3 stone steps of the Whitfield Law Office at 9:45, and I sat in a wooden chair in the outer room until Ruth Whitfield called me back at 10 o'clock exactly. Mr. Whitfield was sitting behind a desk the size of a dining table, and on the desk was a leather folder so old the leather had gone the color of burnt sugar, and on top of the folder was a small brass key and a sealed envelope. Mr. Whitfield looked up at me over his glasses. He said, "Caleb, you have your grandfather's eyes." And then he told me a story that I am going to tell you now the way he told it to me, as close as memory allows. In the summer of 1971, 1 year after Elias Burke died, my grandfather came into Ambrose Whitfield's office with a deed, a surveyor's plat, and a sealed envelope. The deed was for 1 3/4 acres of land that had been carved out of the old Burke property before it was sold. The surveyor's plat showed a small cabin and a well and a spring on the parcel. The sealed envelope contained instructions. My grandfather asked Mr. Whitfield to do 3 things. First, he asked that the deed to the 1 3/4 acres be recorded in the county register not under my grandfather's name, and not under the family farm's name, but under a trust. A trust my grandfather had set up that same morning with Mr. Whitfield's help. The trust had 1 beneficiary, and that beneficiary was to be named on a specific date, the 21st birthday of a person who had not yet been born, but whom my grandfather fully expected to be born. Second, He asked that the cabin be left exactly as it was on the day. He closed the door. Nothing removed, nothing added. The property taxes on the 1 3/4 acres were to be paid every year out of the trust, in cash, at the courthouse window, by Mr. Whitfield personally or by his designated successor. The taxes were not to be paid by the Hollis family farm. They were not to appear on any Hollis family tax record. As far as the Hollis farm's books were concerned, that 1 3/4 acres did not exist. Third, he asked that on the 21st birthday of the named beneficiary, the sealed envelope be opened, the contents be read to the beneficiary in person, and the brass key be handed over. And Mr. Whitfield repeated this part to me twice, because he said my grandfather had repeated it to him twice. The boy is to go and open that door himself. Mr. Whitfield looked at me across the desk. He said, "Caleb, the trust names you. You were born 6 years after your grandfather died, but he knew you were coming. He told me he knew. He said his son, your father, had told him he and your mother were going to name their first son Caleb, after your mother's father. He said, 'Write the name down now, Ambrose. Write the name down and hold it.' He slid the sealed envelope across the desk to me. He said, 'I am the only living person who has known the contents of this envelope for the last 47 years. My father knew before me. My father died in 2003. I have not opened it. I will not open it. Your grandfather's instructions were that you open it yourself, in this office, in my presence, today.' I picked up the envelope. My hands were shaking. I slit the top of it with a letter opener Ruth Whitfield handed me, and I pulled out 3 sheets of paper folded together. The first sheet was a letter. I am going to read it to you the way I remember it, because I have read it so many times since that I know it the way you know a song. It said, 'Caleb, if you are reading this, you are 21 years old, and I am a long time dead, and some things have happened in our family that I was not able to prevent. I am sorry for those things. I tried to leave enough of a rope behind me that when you needed it, it would be there. This letter is one end of that rope. The cabin is the other end. I want to tell you about Elias Burke. Elias Burke was my friend for 34 years. He was the best man I ever knew. When I came home from the war in 1946 with nothing but clothes on my back and a bad left shoulder, Elias Burke gave me a job on his father's place, and he gave me a room in his own house, and he gave me the first $100 I ever saved, because he took out his own pocket and put it in my hand, and he said, 'Harlan, you're going to build something with this, and I do not want it back.' I did build something with it. I built our farm. Every acre of our farm started with that $100. In 1968, Elias came to me and told me he was sick and he was not going to get better. He had no children. His wife Lorraine was a kind woman, but not a strong one. And Elias knew that when he was gone, she would sell the place off in pieces to whoever came around first with cash. He did not want the whole of it to go to strangers. He did not want to leave his wife unprotected. And he did not want to leave unsaid the thing he wanted to say to me. What he said to me was this. There was a cabin on the northwest corner of his property. His own grandfather had built it in 1903. Under the floor of that cabin, Elias's grandfather had buried a strong box. In the strong box were certain documents and certain items that had been in the Burke family since before the Civil War. Elias had never opened the strong box. His father had never opened it. His grandfather had sealed it and written on the lid, to be opened by a man who has earned it. Elias told me that whatever was in that box, it had kept the Burke family alive through 3 generations of hard times, because the knowledge of it had kept them steady. He said to me, "Harlan, I am the last of my line. I want you to have it. I want you to take the parcel with the cabin before Lorraine sells the rest. I want you to hold it, and I want you to decide when it's time to open it. And I want you to give it to the one in your family who will understand what it means." Caleb, I bought that parcel from Elias for $1 in the spring of 1969. And I recorded the deed under my own name because I wanted Lorraine to have the money from selling the rest, and I did not want her to know the cabin was still carved out. Elias died the next spring. I closed the door of the cabin in the fall of 1971, 1 year after he was gone, because by then I had come to understand something about my own son, your father, that made me afraid. Your father is a good man, Caleb. I loved him, but he was a man who could be led. He had married your mother, and I could see she was a strength in him, and I worried, even then, about what would happen to him if he ever lost her. I could not give the cabin to a man who could be led. I had to wait. I waited for you. I knew you were coming. Your mother told me in the spring of 1980 that she and your father were going to have a child, and that if it was a boy, they would name him Caleb. I died in the winter of that year, before you were born, but I had already gone to Ambrose Whitfield and set the trust, and written your name on a piece of paper, and handed him this envelope. I do not know what your life has been. I hope it has been gentler than I am afraid it has been. If you are reading this letter, then the boy has grown into a man, and the man has waited until he is 21, and now it is time. Go to the cabin. Open the door with the key Mr. Whitfield has given you. Lift the floor under the east window. The strong box is there. What is inside the strong box is yours, free and clear in the eyes of the law, because the trust gives it to you and nobody else. But what is inside the strong box is not the most important thing. The most important thing is that you now know who you are and who you came from and what you are carrying. You are carrying Elias Burke's kindness and my gratitude and the honor of every Burke who came before him. You are carrying the only inheritance that ever mattered in our family. Carry it well. I am proud of you. I have been proud of you since before you were born. Your grandfather, Harlan Hollis. I am not going to tell you I did not cry when I read that letter, because I did. I cried in Ambrose Whitfield's office with the brass key in my hand and my grandfather's handwriting on 3 sheets of paper in front of me, and Mr. Whitfield sat across the desk from me and did not say a word. He let me cry. When I was done, he handed me a cotton handkerchief from the drawer of his desk, and he said, "There is more, Caleb, but the more is for you to find. Take the key. I will drive behind you in my car." Your grandfather's instructions were also that I be present when the door is opened as a witness. The second sheet of paper in the envelope was a certified copy of the deed to the 1 3/4 acres, with the trust named as the holder and my name, Caleb James Hollis, named as the sole beneficiary, effective on the date of my 21st birthday. The third sheet of paper was a surveyor's plat from 1969, showing the exact location of the cabin, the well, the spring, and marked in my grandfather's own pencil, a small square under the words East Window, 2 feet down. I want to tell you something else that was in Mr. Whitfield's office that day that I have not told you yet, because I did not understand its full weight until later. Ruth Whitfield had pulled the county tax records for the 1 3/4 acres. She laid them out on the desk. 47 years of tax receipts, every single year, paid in cash, paid on time, never once attached to the Hollis Farms property tax bill, which meant something very specific. It meant that when my father had signed the farm over Garrett and Travis, when he had filed the paperwork with Deanna standing behind him, he had signed over 320 acres of row crops and pasture and timber. He had not signed over the 1 3/4 acres in the northwest corner. He could not have. He did not own them. He had never owned them. Nobody in the Hollis family had owned them since 1971, because my grandfather had put them in a trust, and the trust was mine, and it had been mine from the day I was born. And sitting on those 1 3/4 acres was a cabin, and under the floor of that cabin was a strong box. And whatever was in that strong box, my grandfather believed, strongly enough to structure the last decade of his life around it, was the real inheritance. Mr. Whitfield drove behind me in a dark green sedan. I drove Harlan Keters' pickup. Harlan himself rode in the passenger seat, because when I had called him from the Whitfield office to tell him where I was going, he had asked if he could come, and I had said yes. I wanted him there. He had been more of a father to me for 3.5 years than my own father had been for 17. We turned off the county road onto an old logging track that I had never noticed before, because it was half grown over with scrub pine, and we bounced along it for almost a mile until the track opened into a small clearing, and there was a cabin, exactly as my grandfather had left it in 1971. The wood had gone silver gray. The porch was sagging. The single window on the front was clouded with dust on the inside and cobwebs on the outside. The deadbolt was a heavy brass one, corroded green around the keyhole. A sumac had grown up through the bottom step. I stood in front of that door for a long time. Harlan Keters stood to my right. Ambrose Whitfield stood to my left, leaning on his walking stick, his 81-year-old face perfectly calm, like a man who had been waiting for this moment since before I was born. which, in a way, he had. I put the brass key in the lock. It did not want to turn at first. I worked it back and forth, and I felt the pins move, and then I felt the whole mechanism give, and the deadbolt slid back with a sound like a chapter closing. The door opened about 6 inches, and then stopped. I put my shoulder against it and pushed. It opened the rest of the way. Inside, the cabin was one room, a cast-iron stove in the corner, a small table with 2 chairs, a narrow bed along the west wall with a wool blanket folded at the foot of it, so thoroughly eaten by moths over 53 years that was more lace than blanket, a pair of work boots under the bed, cracked and stiff, a coat on a nail by the door, a kerosene lamp on the table, and on the table next to the lamp, a small framed photograph of 2 young men in their 20s, standing shoulder to shoulder in front of a barn, both of them squinting into the sun, both of them smiling. I did not have to ask who they were. One of them was my grandfather. The other was Elias Burke. Ambrose Whitfield stepped in behind me. He said quietly, "The east window, Caleb." I walked to the east window. I knelt down. The floorboards that were wider than the rest. 3 broad planks, cut from a tree that must have been old already when the cabin was built. I could see, now that I was looking, that one of the planks was not nailed. It was only wedged. I worked my fingers under the edge of it, and I lifted it, and I set it aside. Under was a square of packed earth. I dug with my hands. I did not need a tool. The earth was loose, almost as though it had been waiting to be moved. 2 feet down, my fingers struck metal. I pulled the strong box out of the ground. It was iron. It was heavy. It was the size of a family Bible, and it had a single padlock on the front. Wrapped in oilcloth around the padlock was a smaller brass key, and the smaller brass key was tied to the lock with a piece of wax string. I cut the string with my pocket knife. I opened the lock. I lifted the lid. I am going to tell you what was inside, but I want to tell you first that what was inside was not gold. I want to say that plainly, because I know what you are expecting. My grandfather did not leave me treasure in the way that word is usually meant. What he left me was something else, something that, by the laws of the state we live in and the laws of the United States, is worth considerably more than gold and lasts considerably longer. Inside the strong box, wrapped in 3 layers of wax canvas, were the following items. 1. A complete, original, signed, and notarized mineral rights deed dated March of 1903, conveying subsurface mineral rights, oil, gas, and all recoverable minerals for the entire original Burke property, which was a contiguous 640 acres, to the Burke family in perpetuity, severed from the surface rights. What that means in plain language is this. When Lorraine Burke sold off the Burke property in pieces after Elias's death, she sold the surface rights only. She could not sell the mineral rights. She did not own them. She had never owned them. The mineral rights had been severed from the surface in 1903 by Elias's grandfather, who had understood something about that land that nobody else in the county had understood at the time. And the mineral rights had stayed with the Burke family through 3 generations, until Elias, who had no heir, had handed them to my grandfather in an oilcloth-wrapped bundle in the summer of 1969, and my grandfather had buried them under the floor of a cabin on the only piece of the Burke property that he had carved out and kept. 2. A series of geological surveys, conducted privately by a mining engineer out of Pittsburgh in 1947, 1956, and 1968, showing the subsurface formations under that 640 acres. The 1968 survey, the last one, included a handwritten note from the engineer that said, "Substantial natural gas reserves, Marcellus-type shale, not currently economic to extract, but will be within 50 years. That note was dated August of 1968. The engineer had been right within 6 years of his estimate. The land above those mineral rights had been producing natural gas since 2014, pumped by 3 different operators who had leased the surface access from the 3 different families who now own the surface parcels, and who had been paying royalties into an escrow account at the county courthouse under the name of the recorded mineral rights holder, because nobody had ever come forward to claim them. 3. A ledger, bound in brown leather, kept in Ambrose Whitfield's father's handwriting, and then in Ambrose Whitfield's own handwriting, recording every payment that had been made into that escrow account from 2014 forward. Ambrose Whitfield had known about the mineral rights. He had been the one who filed a notice with the county in 1971, when my grandfather first set up the trust, that the holder of the mineral rights was a trust administered by his law firm, and that any royalties due to holder were to be deposited into escrow pending the naming of the beneficiary. He had kept that filing current every year for 53 years. He had watched the escrow account grow from zero to a few $1,000s to tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands to, by the morning I opened the strong box in the fall of my 21st year, a little over $2.4 million. 4. A letter from Elias Burke to my grandfather, dated June 1968, which I am not going to read to you in full, because it was between the two of them, but which ended with the sentence, Harlan, the land gave this to my people, and my people did nothing to deserve it except love the land back. Give it to the one in your line, who will love the land back. That is the only rent it asks. I knelt on the dusty floor of that cabin with the open strong box in front of me, and I read those documents in order. And when I was done reading, I looked up at Ambrose Whitfield, and I said, Mr. Whitfield, did my father know? Mr. Whitfield said, No, he did not. Your grandfather's instructions were explicit. Your father was not to be told, in your grandfather's lifetime or after, under any circumstance. Your grandfather believed, and I am sorry to say this to you, Caleb, but I will not lie about it. Your grandfather believed that your father did not have a temperament to hold this knowledge without it changing him. He believed your father would spend it, or lose it, or let someone take it from him. He chose to wait for a grandson. I said, Did anyone else know? He said, 3 people. Myself, my father before me, and a surveyor in the next county, who is now deceased. That is all. Harlan Keter was standing in the doorway of the cabin. He had not come all the way in. He had been giving me room. He said, very quietly, Son, I think you had better sit down for a minute. I sat down on the floor of that cabin. I did not feel triumphant. I want you to understand that. I felt, more than anything else, sad. I felt the weight of 53 years of silence, and the weight of a friendship between 2 men I had never met, and the weight of a grandfather I had never known reaching through time to put his hand on my shoulder, and the weight of a farm 3 miles south of where I was sitting that had been run by my family for 3 generations, and was now signed over to 2 stepbrothers who had taken ceramic mud to my head when I tried to protect my grandfather's pocket watch. But I also felt something else. I felt Elias Burke's sentence, the one about rent. Love the land back. That is the only rent it asks. I had loved that land back. I had walked every fence of it. I had known every corner of it. I had done the work when no one else would. And now, without having asked for a single thing, I had been handed the part of it that nobody else had even known existed. I closed the strong box. I put it back in the pickup. I drove Mr. Whitfield back to his office. I drove Harlan back to his farm. And I went to the spare room where I had been sleeping for 3.5 years, and I closed the door, and I did not come out until the next morning. I want to tell you what happened in the next 6 weeks, because the story does not end at the cabin. It begins there. The first thing I did was nothing. For 3 days I did nothing. I drove to the grain elevator, and I worked my shift, and I came home, and I ate Harlan's wife's cooking, and I slept. On the 4th day, I drove back to Ambrose Whitfield's office, and I sat down across from him, and I said, Mr. Whitfield, I need your help. I need to do this the right way. I need to do it the way my grandfather would have done it. He smiled. It was the first time I had seen him smile. He said, Caleb, that is exactly what your grandfather hoped you would say. Here is what we did over the course of the following 6 weeks. First, we notified the 3 natural gas operators who had been pumping on the Burke parcels that the mineral rights holder had been identified and that all future royalty payments were to be made directly to the trust, not the escrow account. We provided them with certified copies of the 1903 deed and the 1971 trust filing. 2 of the 3 operators accepted the documentation within a week. The 3rd sent their own attorney out to examine the original records at the county courthouse. Their attorney looked at the records for 2 hours, walked out of the courthouse, called his client, and told them to pay. The documentation was airtight. It had been airtight for 121 years. Second, we claimed the escrow account. $2.4 million, plus accumulated interest. The money went into a new trust account that Mr. Whitfield helped me set up with conditions I wrote myself, because I had 3 days alone in a spare room to think about what I wanted the money to do. Third, and this is a part one want you to pay attention to, because this is a part where I had to become the man my grandfather had waited for, I drove out to the farmhouse. I drove out on a Saturday morning. I did not call ahead. I pulled into the drive in Harlan Keters' pickup, and I parked, and I got out, and I walked up the porch steps I had walked up 10,000 times in my life, and I knocked on the front door. Deanna answered. Her face went through 3 expressions in about 2 seconds. First surprise, then anger, then, and this is the part that told me something about her I had not known before, fear. She had seen the truck. She did not recognize it. She did not know who had come with me. She did not know what I was there for. And whatever she had been telling herself about me for the last 3.5 years, it had not prepared her for possibility that I might one day come back on my own terms. I said, Deanna, I need to speak with my father, in the kitchen, with you present. And I need Garrett and Travis to be there as well. This is not a conversation that is going to happen twice. She said, your father isn't. I said, Deanna, I know my father is home. His truck is in the drive. I am going to wait in the kitchen. You have 10 minutes to get everyone there. I walked past her. I walked down the hallway I had grown up in. I walked into the kitchen, and I sat down at the table, and I put a folder on the table in front of me, and I waited. They came in one at a time over the next 8 minutes. My father first. He looked older than I remembered. He would not meet my eyes. Then Garrett, who had put on weight and grown a beard and looked embarrassed, which was more than I had expected of him. Then Travis, who walked in with the same swagger he had walked in with when he hit me with the mug, and who stopped swaggering about halfway across the kitchen when he saw my face. Then Deanna, last, because she had been on the phone in the bedroom, trying to reach her brother who was an attorney in the next county. She had already figured out that something was wrong. She just did not yet know what. I opened the folder. I laid out the documents one by one. The 1903 mineral rights deed, the 1971 trust, the surveyor's plat, the handwritten note from the 1968 engineer, the tax records showing 53 years of payments made outside the Hollis farm accounts, the escrow ledger, the letter from my grandfather. I did not lay out Elias Burke's letter. That one was mine. I kept it folded in my jacket. I explained what each document was. I used Mr. Whitfield's language, the same way he had explained it to me. I did not raise my voice. I did not use the word betrayed. I did not use the word deserved. I laid out facts. I told them that the 1 3/4 acres in the northwest corner of what they had been calling our family farm was not, and had never been since 1971, part of the family farm. I told them it belonged to a trust, and the trust belonged to me, and it had belonged to me from the day I was born. I told them that the mineral rights for 640 acres of what had once been the Burke property, including the 3 parcels that now belonged to 3 different neighbors, whom I had also informed by letter, belonged to the same trust, and had been producing royalties since 2014. I told them the amount in the escrow account. I watched Deanna's face when I said the number. She sat down. She had been standing until then. Travis said, that can't be. I said, it can be. It is. It has been. Ambrose Whitfield has the records. The county has the records. The natural gas operators have accepted the records. If you want to contest any of it, you may try. It will cost you a great deal of money, and you will lose. My father had not said a word. He was looking at the letter, the one from my grandfather. He had recognized the handwriting. He said, finally, did he leave that for you? I said, yes. He left it in Mr. Whitfield's office this summer after Elias Burke died. He left it for me because he knew I was coming. My father's eyes filled. He did not wipe them. He said, very quietly, I never knew. I said, I know you didn't. He didn't tell you. He told me why. I don't want to tell you why in front of everyone, but I will tell you later if you want to hear it. Deanna tried to speak. She said, Caleb, if there's some kind of misunderstanding, some way that we can... I held up my hand. I said, Deanna, I am going to speak now, and I am going to finish. And when I am finished, I am going to leave. You are going to listen. I said, 3.5 years ago, you put my things in a garbage bag on this porch. My father watched from this window. Travis put a ceramic mug against the side of my head 2 hours before that. And nobody in this house spoke a word to him about it. I walked out of here at 17 with no money, no place to sleep, and a pocket watch that the three of you had already tried to take from me. I slept in a barn for 4 nights. I finished high school driving 3 days a week to the county seat in a truck I did not own, paid for by a man who was not related to me by a single drop of blood, who took me in because he owed a kindness to my grandfather that he never got to repay. I have not been back to this house since. I have not asked for anything. I have not called. I have not written. I have not spoken your names. I am not here today for revenge. I want you to hear that clearly, because I want you to believe me. My grandfather did not raise a boy to become a vengeful man, even though he died before I was born, because he reached through a cabin door and a strong box and a 53-year-old letter and raised me anyway. What I am here for is to tell you what is going to happen next, and to tell you to your faces, because my grandfather would have told you to your faces. The farm is yours. I am not contesting the transfer. I do not want it. 320 acres of good row crop ground that I walked every foot as a child is yours, Garrett, and yours, Travis, and you will make it what you can. I wish you well with it. I mean that ground deserves to be loved, and if you love it back, it will feed you, and if you don't, it will show you the door. That is between you and the land now. The mineral rights are mine. The royalties are mine. The escrow account is mine. The cabin is mine. The 1 3/4 acres are mine. These things were never yours, and they were never Dad's, and they were never the family farms. They were Elias Burke's, and then they were my grandfather's, and they were held in trust for me from the day I was born. I did not take anything from you. I could not have taken anything from you, because none of it was ever yours to lose. I have set up a new trust with the royalties. It has 3 purposes. The first is to pay me a modest living, which is all I want. The second is to fund college educations, at any college the child chooses, for any child in this family who asks for it for the next 50 years. That includes any children you may have, Garrett. That includes any children you may have, Travis. That includes any children any of us may have. I will not punish the next generation for this generation's decisions. My grandfather would not have wanted that. The third purpose is to fund, in perpetuity, a small scholarship at the county high school in the name of Elias Burke for students who intend to stay in this county and work this land. That is how I intend to pay back the rent that was paid forward to me. Dad, I would like to speak with you alone before I leave today, if you are willing. Deanna, Garrett, Travis, I do not have anything further to say to you today, and I do not expect to have anything further to say to you for a long time. I am not angry with you. I want you to understand that. I stopped being angry with you a long time ago. But I am not your son, Deanna, and I have not been your brother, Garrett or Travis, since the day you took that watch out of a velvet box on the mantel and tried to pry the back off of it with a pocket knife. I do not intend to pretend otherwise. That is all I came to say. I closed the folder. I stood up. Deanna was crying. Garrett was looking at the floor. Travis had not moved since I had said the number in the escrow account. My father was still looking at the letter. I walked out of the kitchen and down the hall and out onto the front porch. I stood there for a minute, looking out over the fields I had walked as a boy. The soybeans were in. It was a good stand. Somebody had taken care of it. I was glad. That land had never done anything to me. My father came out a few minutes later. He closed the door behind him. He stood next to me on the porch, and for a long time he did not say anything. And then he said, I am sorry, Caleb. I have been sorry for a long time. I did not know how to come find you. I was ashamed. I said, I know, Dad. He said, your grandfather was right about me. I said, he wasn't right about you forever. He was right about you then. You can still be the man he wanted you to be. It's not too late. It's just later than it should have been. He cried then. My father had not cried in front of me since my mother died. He cried on that porch for a long time. I did not put my arm around him because I was not ready for that, And he did not ask me to, because he understood. When he was done, he wiped his face on his sleeve, and he said, "Can I see it?" The cabin. "Can I see it?" I said, "Yes." "Not today." "Soon." He nodded. I drove back to Harlan Keters' farm. Harlan was on the front porch, in his rocker, drinking coffee. He looked up when I pulled in. He did not ask how it went. He just poured me a second cup of coffee from the thermos next to his chair, and he handed it to me. And I sat down next to him, and we watched the sun go down over his pasture. I am 23 years old now. 2 years have passed since the morning I opened the cabin door. I want to tell you what has happened since, because my grandfather would have wanted the story to close properly. I did take my father to the cabin in the spring after that fall. I unlocked the door for him. I showed him the photograph of himself and Elias Burke on the table. Of my grandfather and Elias Burke. My father sat in the chair his father had sat in. He held the photograph for a long time. He read the letter. He cried again. When we walked out, he locked the door behind us, and he handed me the key, and he said, "It's yours." He was right to leave it to you. I would have ruined it, and I am grateful he did not give me the chance. My father and I talk now, not every week, but enough. He divorced Deanna 8 months after the kitchen conversation. I did not ask him to, and I did not encourage him to. He told me, afterwards, that he had needed to do it for himself, because he could not look at himself in a mirror as long as he was still married to the woman who had put his son's belongings in a garbage bag. Garrett is running the farm. He is doing a decent job of it. He came to see me last summer and apologized, and I accepted his apology, because his apology was real. Travis has not spoken to me. I did not expect him to. I have made peace with that. The scholarship in Elias Burke's name has been awarded 3 times now. The first recipient was a girl from a dairy family on the east side of the county who wanted to study agronomy at the state university. I met her at the high school assembly where the scholarship was announced. She told me she had never heard of Elias Burke. I told her about him. I told her he'd been a kind man, and that kindness was the only thing in this world that compounded faster than money, and that if she worked hard and stayed good, she would be paying him back in other people's lives long after the money ran out. She cried. I gave her my grandfather's cotton handkerchief, the one Ambrose Whitfield had given me in his office that morning, which I had been carrying in my jacket ever since. I told her it was a loan. I told her to give it to the next person who needed it. Ambrose Whitfield passed away last winter. He was 83. He handled my grandfather's affairs for 53 years. He handled mine for 2, and he died in his chair at his desk on a Wednesday afternoon with a cup of coffee half finished in front of him. Ruth Whitfield runs a firm now. Peter Whitfield, her son, is a partner. They are good people. They have kept every instruction my grandfather left them, and I trust them the way my grandfather trusted them, because trust in this county is something you earn by keeping your word across generations, and the Whitfields have kept their word across 3. I still live in Harlan Keters' spare room. I know I could buy a house. I could buy the whole county. Honestly, I haven't. Harlan is 81 now, and his wife passed 2 years ago, and he does not sleep well at night when he is alone in the house, and he will not say that out loud, but he does not have to, because I am the son he never had, and he is the father I needed, and there is nothing in the world that can make me leave that spare room as long as he is still in the house across the hall. When he is gone, and I hope that is a long time from now, I will build a small place for myself on the 1 3/4 acres in the northwest corner of what used to be the Burke farm, near the cabin, within sight of it. I will keep the cabin exactly as it is. I will not restore it. I will not modernize it. It will stay the way my grandfather closed it in 1971, because that cabin is not a house. It is a letter, from a dead man to a boy who had not yet been born, and you do not rewrite a letter after it has been delivered. Some mornings I walk out to the cabin alone. I sit on the porch step, the one the sumac was growing through, which I pulled up carefully so the step would last, and I drink a cup of coffee as the sun comes up over the pine scrub. I think about Elias Burke, whom I never met. I think about my grandfather, whom I never met. I think about my mother, whom I barely remember. I think about Harlan Keter, who took me in. I think about Ambrose Whitfield, who kept a secret for 53 years because a man he respected asked him to. I think about my father, who is finally trying. I think about how the land gave everything I have now to a line of people who loved it back, and how the only rent it ever asked was that I love it back too. I was thrown out at 17 with a garbage bag of clothes and a pocket watch and nothing else. I was told I was not family. I was told I had no place. I was told the land I had walked every day of my life belonged to somebody else. They were wrong. The land had belonged to me all along. It had been waiting for me behind a locked door in a clearing at the end of a road nobody maintained anymore. It had been waiting for me for 53 years. It had been waiting for me since before I was born. The door is open now. The letter has been delivered. The rent is being paid. And somewhere, I like to think, two old men in their 20s are standing shoulder to shoulder in front of a barn, squinting into the sun, smiling, watching the rest of the story unfold. Thank you for staying with us all the way to the end. Don't forget to subscribe and check out the other stories on screen right now.